So you finally finished it. You've written the end. Time to get the script produced, right? Wrong. It's time for rewrites. Yeah, you didn't think about this part the first time you told everyone you're going to write films for a living, did you? And if you still don't give much thought to them, let me lay down some truths for you. That first draft you have, it's not perfect, and no, it's not going to change the face of cinema forever. Unless somehow you're the love child of an orgy between Billy Wilder, Tarantino, Sorkin and Mamet, that first draft you have is going to work better as fire kindled than a produced film. So let's get cracking. Step 1. Leave it alone. Once you finish that first draft, just give it a week or two. Give yourself some perspective so that when you look at it again, you can look at it critically, which is a hard thing to do when you've sat at your desk for weeks on end working on a first draft. In the meantime, watch and read everything that is similar to your script. Write down what works well in these films and what doesn't. Work out the conventions of the genres you are working in and how to subvert them. Then when you go back to your script, be honest with yourself. Is there any occasions where cliché takes over? Is your premise unique in comparison to what has come before? Or in retrospect, does it look a bit too familiar? Step 2. The read-through. This one can be pretty rough, especially if you haven't written many screenplays. Personally, I've had occasions where I've had to put my earliest work down. It's natural, flaws will appear regardless of whether you wrote that first draft in a week or in a year, whether you're new to the game or a seasoned writer. And speaking of seasoned writers, David Mamet once said, "You've got to stand being bad if you want to be a writer. If you don't, you're never going to write anything good. So print out your script, get some pens and get to work. Have one pen for stuff that needs to be cut, one for stuff that can be improved upon, and one for when new ideas pop into your head." Step 3. The big changes. This is perhaps the hardest aspect of the rewrite. When doing your read through, you may have realised some things that really don't work in your script. Perhaps your protagonist's motivations and goals are too unclear, perhaps they are inactive for most of the story. Your twist could be too sudden without enough clues, or your scenes could just be in the wrong order for narrative cohesion. You are never going to write a script that doesn't need changes. So what you have to do at this point is decide what is the most essential thing in your script. The one thing that you can't change, the reason you wrote it in the first place. Figure that out, and then realise the things in your script which do not serve this one thing. And you have to be prepared to cut absolutely anything in your script. And before you say to yourself, this guy doesn't know what he's going on about, get the picture now. Once you've discovered what your script is really about, then you can go about crafting your script and allowing everything else to serve that one essential aspect. Step 4. Character. Your main priority now should be making your protagonist click. But that will only happen if they serve your premise. Say for example you are writing a fantasy film that tackles a basic good versus evil dynamic, where one character has to bear the burden of bringing the world to peace. And say you write your protagonist as someone who is fearless, an incredible fighter and willing to take on the burden as he sees it as his destiny. What would this film say? Not much. But if you make your protagonist weaker, used to a life of simple idyll, and now has to bear the symbolic force of this world's evil that corrupts all beings, what do we have then? We have a discussion about mankind's seduction to corruption, a moral tale that heroism comes in every form, and a character progression from creature comforts to undergoing the world's greatest trial by fire. So your protagonist has to serve your premise and exhibit the most possible character change whilst remaining interesting and imperfect. If creating a character sheet or something of the ilk helps you, go ahead and do it. Otherwise, the main thing you need to know is, what does your protagonist want and what is standing in their way? The second part should be twofold, their internal weaknesses and their opponents. In my script sample that is provided in the description, you will see that my protagonist's external desire is clear. He wants to find his brother's inheritance. However, in my read through, I realised that I didn't flesh out his motivations for his desire enough, if you like his internal desires, and as a result I decided he was too unsympathetic. Both these issues are one that can be tackled together. By better understanding his motivations, a reader can better sympathise with him. You may find similar problems with your own protagonist, or they may be different. Regardless, you can now consider yourself within the problem-solving part of your rewrites. You find the issue, you spend an entire draft ironing it out. After that, you move on to the next problem and the next draft. To follow through with my example, in order to make my protagonist more sympathetic, I started with simple save the cat techniques, like proving he was more intelligent than his colleagues and giving an old woman freebies. After that, I added a few quick scenes to visually show his psyche, for example, staring amicably at his one award amongst the thicket of his brother's achievements. And finally, I decided he needed to emotionally connect with another character, one he will act differently to in comparison to the remaining supporting cast, and thus I added a romantic subplot in the hope that this would be the underlying heart of the film, whilst making sure it intercepted with the main plot to both raise the stakes and provide my protagonist with difficult choices. After you have laboured over your protagonist, I recommend writing a separate draft for each one of your main supporting characters, all with a view to developing their intentions, their obstacles, and their fears. Step 5. Plot. The rhythm of my plot is often a victim to my quickly written first drafts. By that I mean there are moments where the action stagnates, scenes are placed in the wrong order, there's underdeveloped acts and so on. What I do to get a greater sense of the whole is to draw a timeline of my first draft, marking up the act breaks, the protagonist's highs and low points, the rise in the stakes and the hard choices, all with the page numbers noted. Whilst there is not a hard and fast law that says X event must happen on page Y, this will just become a good visual indicator of whether your turning points are spread too thin or packed too tightly, leaving the rest of the room with empty breathing space. If you're feeling overwhelmed at this stage, there are many templates out there to help. They range all the way from Blake Snyder's beat sheet to John Truby's 22 steps, but never consider them gospel. Ultimately, you get to write your story how you want. One such structure that has helped me in the past is Gotham Writers Workshop's high and low flow. I feel it gives you the means of making sure that the dynamics to your scripts are always changing, and thus the likelihood of you boring your reader smaller. Once you have fully organised the whereabouts of all your turning points, revelations, highs, lows and changes in the stakes, it's time to get down to the nitty gritty. Step 6. Theme and symbolism. Hopefully you already know the theme of your script, and hopefully it relates back to that question we asked ourselves earlier, why are you writing this script? Now read through your script again and see if it resonates. Is your theme enforced by your protagonist's journey and choices? Does your side plot make it ring home? Your theme may seem really abstract, but it's important because it can inform your character's choices when you feel in a rut, and it is ultimately what is going to create your emotional pathos when your final revelations rear head in your final act. Ultimately, theme is a topic which is purely subjective to your own script, and you're the only one to pass judgment upon it. However, you can get a little help from using symbols. Symbols and images are a difficult thing, and like theme, they should be treated with delicacy. But think about it this way, would Die Hard resonate as much if a news reporter at the end screamed, "The little guy always wins"? Or would Fight Club be as powerful if Tyler Durden looked at the camera and said consumerism is bad? The answer is no. On the other side of the spectrum, don't do what I did in my first draft of my first scripts I ever wrote, where I tried to use a wardrobe as a symbol of oppression. Instead, think about Shawshank Redemption's Rockhammer, Parasite's Scholar Stone, and Fantastic Mr. Fox's Wolf in the Distance. Just don't lose your head over symbols. Step 7. Setup and payoff. Now this one is worth losing your head over. Look at this guy. His name is Anton Chekhov, a 19th century Russian playwright, and the modern day theory, Chekhov's gun, comes from his belief that if in the first act you have a hunger pistol on the wall, then in the following one it should be fired. Otherwise, don't put it in there. Unlike most things in screenwriting, this is considered an underlying law. So run through your latest draft and ask yourselves, is my twist deserves? Are there enough clues for it? Does my climactic moment or revelation feel fulfilling or just simply out of the blue? Is there setup to my payoff? My sample scripts that I've provided in the video's description has a mystery element to it, and in my first draft 2 of the 3 big reveals were completely undeserved. They had no setup. So if you're interested, take a look at both versions and see where I hid the clues. Step 8. Cutting and condensing. By now, your script may be looking bloated. Maybe not Aaron Sorkin's 400-page first draft bloated, but bloated all the same. So scene by scene you have to go through your script and ask yourself, does my script work without the scene? If the answer is yes, cut it. Then ask yourself, is this one scene absolutely essential to the story? If the answer is no, cut it. The beauty of saving all your drafts is that you can come back to them, nothing is lost forever. Now, once you've done that, go through every scene again and think to yourself, in late, out early. No hellos, no goodbyes, get straight to the heart of that scene's essential conflict, and if you don't know what that is, rewrite the scene and find out, and if you can't find the conflict, the scene has no purpose. Cut it. Step 9. Action line work. At this point, if you haven't already, ask someone to read your script, and not your mum or your best friend, someone who is brutally honest and has some idea about screenwriting or filmmaking. Now the first question you should ask that reader is, did they understand it? Did they have a clear picture in their head of what's going on at all times? Clarity should be your main focus when rewriting your action lines. And clarity often results in concision, and clarity and concision results in a quick and enjoyable read. 3 lines per block is a general rule of thumb, but remember the importance of white space. A reader wants to be able to zip through your script, so short and sweet does the trick. Step 10. Dialogue work. Dialogue is something that you can't really teach. Just listen to real people, read a lot of scripts, and read your own dialogue aloud. However, here are some things to consider when doing your own dialogue draft. Exposition is not your friend, but it is at times a necessary evil. Is there enough subtext in your dialogue, or is it too on the nose? Less is more. Don't tell the audience what they already know. Don't tell the characters what they already know. Know what your characters want in every scene and what their obstacle is. Everything should hinge upon this. Another thing I personally do, which may help some of you, is I go through all the primary and secondary characters and make a list for each. I list their character traits, their triggers, colloquialisms, their secrets, and their relationships. Let me quickly explain triggers and relationships. By triggers I mean, what are they insecure about, what do they care about, what offends them. For example, a woman that has dated a string of serial cheaters may quickly work to dismiss her friends when they suggest she tries dating again. So one of her triggers will be talk of relationships. And by relationships I want you to consider this. If a man is independent and pushes against the authority figures in his life, but accepts aspirations from his mother, we understand that there is either a very deep or very troubled relationship between them. On the other hand, if a man is a smooth-talking womanizer, but his voice falters when he speaks to his mother, we know that there is something deeply wrong in that relationship. By knowing your characters better, you can better use subtext. It's natural in a first draft for your characters to speak the same, they'll be speaking the same way you talk. However, by knowing their quirks, you can make each one of them stand out. Step 11. Keep editing. Once you've done all your drafting, your fingertips have developed calluses. Don't stop there. Keep sending your script to more people. I've had this video ready for over a month, but then I received some feedback from a producer on my script in the description. And although I didn't incorporate all of her comments, most of them were bang on. You have to listen to people that have a different viewpoint on your work. Keep an open mind, but decide for yourself what advice is worth listening to or not. So keep editing. You've done the hard part. But the reality is that people will always want to change your script, and honestly, it's never going to be perfect. But here's to trying.